It's an honor to be introducing my friend and colleague Royal Skousen tonight, and I really mean that. I'm not just being polite or ceremonial. It's an honor because, as interesting and valuable as the previous two lectures in this series have been, this one strikes me as the most significant of the three. The central task of the Book of Mormon Critical Text Project has always been, to the extent possible, to restore the original English text of the Book of Mormon by scholarly means. It's an honor because I regard this project as one of the most impressive scholarly efforts in the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one that isn't likely ever to be displaced from that position. Professor Skousen has been the editor, the leader of the project since its inception in 1988, which is to say that he's devoted a quarter of a century to the effort. In terms of sheer, sustained dedication, the project is in a class by itself. In 2001, 13 years into his work, he began to publish the results of his research in multiple massive volumes brought out by the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, or FARMS. In 2009, Yale University Press published his edition of the Book of Mormon, the earliest text, a wonderful contribution that I would love to see in the home of every English-reading Latter-day Saint. And the work continues. I hope that I'm not violating a confidence in passing on a comment that Professor Skousen made to me not long ago. Everything he's studied, every interest he's had, all of his training and background, he says, equipped him to carry out this project. And his background and areas of expertise are impressive. He received his PhD in linguistics from the University of Illinois in 1972. He's taught there, at the University of California at San Diego, at the University of Texas at Austin, and as a Fulbright lecturer at the University of Tampere in Finland. In 2001, he was a fellow of the Max Planck Institute in the Netherlands. He's pursued his interests in linguistic theory and quantum computing with very fruitful results, including the volumes Analogical Modeling of Language, 1989, Analogy and Structure, 1992, and Analogical Modeling, an Exemplar-Based Approach to Language, 2002. Perhaps most important of all, he married Sirku, who has been his indispensable support, assistant, and advisor throughout the history of the Book of Mormon Critical Text Project. There are numerous other assets that he's brought to the project, attributes that in my judgment have been essential to its remarkable success. I believe that they can most usefully be summed up as constituting a remarkable, even fierce, intellectual integrity. His work is meticulous, precise. He's the consummate scholarly craftsman. He won't fudge, won't distort to satisfy anybody or to advance an agenda. He won't tolerate sloppiness, and obviously will not rush to quick publication. He gives intense and painstaking care to even the physical appearance, external and internal, of the project's publications, and he's had vital support in this from the inimitable and irreplaceable Jonathan Saltzman. Reflecting this fierce intellectual integrity has been his adamantine insistence on the independence of the project. Although he's a deeply believing Latter-day Saint, he has maintained successfully and from its very beginning that the project must be run according to the most rigorous academic principles, without distorting allegiance to any particular party, sect, or ideology, that it be independent even of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Only thus can it have the credibility that it must have if it's ultimately to be worthy of the keystone of our religion. In this respect, I confess that Professor Skousen reminds me just a bit of Juanita Brooks, a faithful believer whose lifelong research, I thought that would get a laugh, whose lifelong research into the Mountain Meadows massacre irritated and alienated many of her fellow members of the church, including some of her leaders, but whose value not only to historical scholarship but to the kingdom has now, I think, long since been generally recognized. Nothing but the truth, she famously said, is good enough for the church to which I belong. An anecdote. Dr. Skousen has been a legendarily tough negotiator on behalf of the project, even with leaders of the university and the church. At one point, during the entirely separate talks that brought farms into the university, I announced to then President Merrill J. Bateman that we decided to appoint Royal Skousen as our representative in those negotiations from that point on. For a moment, he seemed speechless with shock. Then when he realized that I was joking, he laughed loudly. He, too, had plainly come to respect Professor Skousen's tenacity and principle. The Book of Mormon Critical Text Project has already made an enormous contribution, and the gift keeps on giving. Without it, we would still be at the mercy of critics shouting about the number of changes made to the Book of Mormon text after its first printing. They've considerably underestimated that number, by the way. and claiming both that our failure to acknowledge those changes demonstrates a cover-up, and that the sheer fact of the changes proves Joseph Smith a false prophet. We now know far more than they ever bothered to learn about the nature of those changes, and we know that the changes are anything but faith-destroying. Professor Skousen has been able to demonstrate the impressively systematic nature of the original text, as he terms it, which subsequent emendations and corrections have tended to obscure. Without Dr. Skousen's work, we would not have his powerful argument for the nature of the translation, which he believes to have been read off word for word to Joseph's scribes. We wouldn't be aware of the presence of seemingly archaic language in the original text, not Joseph Smith's early 19th century American dialect, and shockingly, not even the language of the King James Version, but terms and expressions from a generation or two earlier. If Professor Skousen's perceptions are accurate, this will be surprising to believers, but I think utterly confounding to skeptics, who insist that the Book of Mormon can be exhaustively explained on the basis of Joseph's own natural information horizon. Without Dr. Skousen's labors, we would be unaware of some of the most persuasive Hebraisms in the text, the if-and conditional sentences in Helaman and Moroni, which seem to me exceedingly difficult to explain on a naturalistic model of the book's origins. We wouldn't know of the 256 places where changes could justifiably be made to the text that, while leaving the doctrines intact, would affect meaning and translation. We wouldn't have the powerful evidence that his work has supplied, demonstrating that Joseph really was encountering the text for the first time, just as the church has always taught, and that the original manuscript really was orally dictated. Above and beyond its intrinsic scholarly merits, the Book of Mormon Critical Text Project is a work of pure disinterested scholarship of the highest order. Royal Skousen's 25 years of intensive labor have, in the Book of Mormon's own language, made weak things become strong unto us. This is my favorite kind of apologetics. It not only takes a weapon away from our critics, but transforms it into a weapon to be wielded effectively in defense of the kingdom. I repeat, it's a great personal honor for me to have this opportunity to introduce Professor Royal Skousen.
So tonight, we're going to be talking about the nature of the original text, and there are three parts. I'm going to go back again to the original manuscript, and we'll talk about that and its very significant importance. Then I'm going to turn to a subject which has been of some controversy for some, and this is the role of conjectural emendations in the Book of Mormon text. And finally, then we will turn to what is the nature of the original language, English language, I might point out, the English language text of the Book of Mormon. Next. So the first thing we have to understand is the overall nature of the kinds of differences we are finding in the text. And the raw numbers are not always helpful, but you have to distinguish between what is being considered. So in volume 4 of the critical text, these are the maroon books that are up here. There are 6 of them. I consider 5,280 cases of variation in the text, places where there is variation or potential variation. These are the cases of conjecture. And I've examined those in there and detailed analyses of each of those. When everything is done and you look at those particular examination of variance, we end up with 2,241 differences in the Yale edition from the standard text. Now, the vast majority of these are, most people would think, rather minor, and I think that's right. And they wouldn't show up in translation. But what is really, first of all, important to realize is there are a number of changes that depend solely upon readings that we haven't seen before, that have not appeared in either the LDS or the RLDS scriptures. There are 606 of these. And if you look at the numbers, you'll see that there are 216 from the original manuscript alone. This means that when it was copied into the printer's manuscript, a change was made. And we only have 28% of the original manuscript. There are 88 changes that come from a reading that is in both the original and the printer's manuscript. This means the change was made by the typesetter, the 1830 typesetter. Now, a lot of those have already been discovered. This is worth pointing out because we've had the printer's manuscript. There are other ones, these 88, there are 88 that have never been put into an edition. There are 2 changes based on the fact that the title page was multiply copied. We wish we had more copies of the original. We only have basically one, the printer's manuscript. For 1/6 of the text, we have 2 copies. The 1830 was set from the original manuscript from Helaman 13 through the end of Mormon. And they made the printer's copy too. So there are 2 copies there. We wish they had made more copies because we have lost most of the original. 28% is left. Joseph Smith put it in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, as we described in the first lecture, and mold and water destroyed most of it. So anyway, the title page, we have multiple copies, and we can discover that Oliver made a couple of errors when he copied from the original, which we don't have for the title page, into the printers, because all the other copies agree, and they're not being copied from each other either. They're independent copies. There are 187 changes that have not appeared in any printed edition that come from the printers alone. These are cases where we don't have the original. But this is the 1830 typesetter making the mistake for the most part. And then there's 113 conjectural emendations, which I propose and others have proposed, which I have accepted, that are discussed in the 6 volumes, and we're going to talk about this tonight, because some people have the mistaken notion that conjectures are a rare thing and never really occur in textual criticism. And this is, I think, a mistake to have this assumption. Okay, the next one. This is one I showed on the first lecture, but I want to repeat it to show the importance of the original manuscript, and we really wish we had all of it. Of the 6 volumes, these represent, like 1 Nephi 1 to 2 Nephi 10 represents the first book here, and these are the 6 books. And for the ones marked with an asterisk, we have good portions of the original manuscript. For the 1st and 4th ones, we have 75%, more or less, of the original. For the 5th one, we have about 25% of the original. For the other 3, the 2nd, 3rd, and the 6th, we have hardly anything, just little portions. And when you look over here, we can see the new readings. These are the new readings that the 606 total we're talking about. Original manuscript, there are 95 here, 93 here, 25 here. It's in proportion to how much we have of the original. So what this means, and you can look here, these are both, and there's some with P alone because we don't have O. But what this means is that if we sort of calculate, if we had the original, there should be about 280 additional changes. And it's very difficult to guess these by conjecture. When these were discovered, the one like here, 95, 93, 25, I was almost always surprised. No one had ever conjectured them. When you saw the reading, though, you said, oh yeah, this actually works in fact, it works better in many instances, and very often more consistent with the text. But it had to be triggered by the actual reading. And so that's something to really keep in mind. When the Yale edition came out, or one of the issues with Yale itself and with the church was whether the subtitle for this book should be the Book of Mormon, the title, and then the original text. And I was considering using the term original text because textual critics always do this. Whatever we come up with, that is the original text. And Yale was a little concerned about it, and the church was, as I mentioned, because we can't really be sure. And in many respects, there are at least, I think, 280 changes that if we knew them, we'd say, oh yes, this is really good that we would know these. So there is a sense in which the earliest text is a little more neutral, but it still includes the possibility of conjectures, as we shall see. Okay, next. Now, this is an important reading, a number. It's 241 readings, new readings, that will make a difference in translation. That if you're translating the Book of Mormon into another language, this will be a change in a word. There are 241 of them, and this is one example from 1 Nephi 12 and 18. And a great and a terrible gulf divideth them, yea, even the sword of the justice of the eternal God. The word is sword. But Oliver misread it. It was by one of the Whitmers who had written it in the original, and it was miscopied by him as word. And I don't know of any language where the word for sword is the same as word. So it'll show up in translation. Now, what you find with this, though, is, and no one ever conjectured this, as far as I know, and actually it was staring everyone in the face. That is, we had the original and people had read it, and I misread it myself as word because of the way it was written by the scribe. Okay, the next one shows, though, that if we look at the whole text, we find that there are only references to the sword of the justice of God. There are no examples in the text of the word of the justice of God. This is what I mean, that when you finally see the reading, you say, oh yeah, and this is consistent with the text. It makes the text, I suppose, a little more violent. You know, maybe we don't like the idea that justice is like a sword, but the rest of the text is supporting this. And we could always say, yes, well, God's justice is his word. He will declare it. He will say something. So you wouldn't automatically think there was something wrong with that. And that's what I mean when I say there's probably 280 more of these out there. Okay, next. Some people have asked me, do we ever find ones that change the doctrine? And the answer is no. There have been none that have changed the doctrine, but there have been a few which restore the correct teachings and the doctrine. And they're not done in a way that is, really overwhelmingly, obvious. But this is an example of what Alma 39:13 originally read, but rather return unto them and acknowledge your faults and repair that wrong which ye have done. This is Alma speaking to Corianton, the wayward missionary. He's supposed to go back to the Zoramites and acknowledge his faults and repair. He's supposed to do something besides just saying, hey, I'm sorry. And what happened on this particular page in the original manuscript is that when Oliver got done writing it, he dropped ink. Little ink drops are all over this page. And they're going every which way and so forth, except on the word repair. The P has an ascender, not in type, but in writing it goes up. And one of those drops of ink just fell right on top of the ascender, like it was crossed. So now it looks sort of like a T. And for Oliver, he writes R's at the end, and he brings the R down so it looks like an N very often. Once the typesetter set Gadianton the robber as Gadianton the nobler. It's one of the best readings in the 1830 because he misread Oliver's R as an N. And Oliver himself misread this one. Once the big heavy ink glob, looks like a heavy crossing of the P, is there, and he reads it as retain. So he put in and retain that wrong, which he had done. And it sat there in the Book of Mormon till the 1920 edition. And then Brother Talmage and the committee, said, this retain, what does this mean? Do you keep this sin, or there's a meaning of retain in the Book of Mormon that is bring it back, take it back. So your sin is out there. Maybe you could think of it as bringing back the sin. But this is not really necessary. But they looked at it and couldn't figure out why it was retain. And so they removed it. And that's okay. But now look what it says. It says, acknowledge your faults and that wrong which you have done. It's removed reparation as part of the process that he's supposed to be involved in. It isn't, now, restoring repair then means that the full notion of repentance appears in this statement instead of just part of it. So it doesn't change any doctrine, but it's reaffirming the true doctrine that we know. And the next one is a nice one, I think, a quote from another part of the Book of Mormon. You can get support for this. So we have these converts, they confess their sins, they're baptized unto repentance, immediately return to the Nephites to endeavor to repair unto them the wrongs which they had done. So there's the very same phraseology. But again, probably none of us have ever noticed there was something wrong with the current reading. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, that we've got these in the text, probably other places that we're not really aware of. Okay, next. There are some Book of Mormon names that are changed. There are two of them that I think are interesting. The others are just changing letters. They're different. The one that I think is interesting is the name of the last son of Zedekiah who survives is not Mulek, but Muloch, M-U-L-O-C-H, which is a rather ominous name because it suggests the pagan god Moloch or Molech that they sacrifice children to. Name your kid after one of these gods, you might get protection. And there are examples of both Jonathan in the Bible and naming children with Baal, a secondary name with Baal, using a pagan god in the name. So it's an interesting aspect. It might be difficult for us to get used to the Molochites, but that's what the text actually supports. Why is it, though, changed to Mulek? It's because later in the text, twice, right here, when it refers to this same individual, in the intervening moments, there had been the city Mulek, and there were 12 times in Alma 51 and once in Alma 5. So when they came to Helaman 5, and when they came to Helaman 6, and they're apparently just saying Mulek for Muloch, and so Oliver just writes it Mulek. He doesn't ask Joseph, how do you spell that? And so we ended up with 3 occurrences of Mulek, and so eventually Orson Pratt decides the first one ought to be Mulek too, make it consistent. And so we end up having the name changed. Okay, that's one of them. The other one, next one, well, I guess we'll come to that later. Okay, so here are some other names that Oliver changed. In these cases, we actually have the original, and for some reason, he changes names. Oliver's an independent guy, and he will make changes as he copies. And this one is probably accidental, Xenic. He first wrote it in the original with CA, or actually CK, and because Xenic, he heard that, and he spells it CK, and then he crossed it out. We showed this earlier, and it was done with CH. He corrects it in line, but the problem was when he came to copying this into the printers, he reinstated all his CKs. He just really forgot. His first occurrence was with CK, so he just ends up changing the name. The other ones are also ones that we have the earliest occurrence for these two, the second, and some other ones that support this, double D, a C. He just changes them. Now, but these are examples that you could say, well, we're not worried about these. Unless you're interested in the study of names and what they might mean and so forth, that would be of interest. Okay, the next one. John Gilbert makes a few changes. You will notice his are less significant, not as frequent names. And one of them is the monetary units, which he changes from shillum to shiblum, because the following monetary unit is shiblon, and the BL in that influenced him to change this one. So that was accidental. Who knows what's going on, but they just made the typesetter made these changes. Okay, the next one. Well, this is the other change, Amalekites. If we read in the book of Alma, we have the Amalekites in Alma chapter 2 and 3. And then when you come to chapter 21 of Alma, it suddenly starts talking about Amalekites. And you think, what's this group? Who are they? But it turns out when we look at the original manuscript here, 3 occurrences, it's almost Amalekites. It's just got an extra in it. And what Oliver did here was he just looked at this and substituted a Bible name for a group, the Amalekites. And so from Alma 21 on, we have Amalekites as the apostate group. So you think there are 2 of them, but there's really only one coming from Amalekite. Okay. Now, let's talk about conjectural emendations. Some people think you should never make conjectural emendations. Well, not only do they occur all the time, sometimes you have to make them. And here is an example that you have to make. We have the original manuscript for 1 Nephi 7 and 5. It reads, "The Lord did soften the heart of Ishmael and also his whole." This is what probably Christian Whitmer, one of the Whitmers, wrote originally. This means originally. He corrected it by inserting another whole in there, in front of it. And maybe this should be W-H-O-L-E, his whole. Now, that's what the text reads. It can't be right. I would not like to see a Book of Mormon reading that way. You soften the heart of Ishmael and also his whole, wherever it is. So we know there's something wrong here. Now, Oliver Cowdery then made a conjecture. When he copied it, he tried to guess what he thought it should be. That's a conjecture. A conjecture is when you come up with another reading that isn't supported by what you already have, whether it's another edition of the Book of Mormon or whether it is a manuscript. If you come up with your own, it's a conjecture. So that's what Oliver did. This is the printer's manuscript. He thought it meant household. I think it's a pretty good guess. But I believe it's whole household. And there are 2 reasons for it. First of all, there are 2 wholes in here. And this is closer to being 2 wholes, a whole house hold, where the D very often is lost in speech. The other one is internal evidence. The next slide will show that if you look at the whole Book of Mormon, wherever it refers to a patriarch, it is the patriarch and his whole household or all his household. It's what we call a universal quantifier. It's not a modern day household. Everybody goes along. And so, and you even have the one in Alma 22, which has the same language. So, and if you look at, Ishmael went out, some of his sons, didn't want to be there. You discover this pretty soon, but they still went. So whole household fits in with the narrative, with the rest of the text, and explains the two wholes. But the real point here is either I or Oliver Cowdery or somebody else with another conjecture has got to make a conjecture. There will be a conjecture here. Your text of the Book of Mormon has household, that is yours, meaning ours. The LDS one has a conjecture. And the Yale edition has a conjecture. There will be conjectures. Okay, next. So, if you look at the standard text, which is the current LDS text, there are 654 conjectured readings in it. That's pretty surprising. But what that means is that as you go along in the transmission of the text, a copyist, a typesetter, an editor sees something and they don't like it. And there's something usually difficult or strange about what they're looking at, and they decide to change it to something that isn't in another edition or in another manuscript or something. They come up with it. That's a conjecture. And in our current text, we have 654 of these. In the Yale edition, there are almost a little bit more than half that, 354, and they're not always the same, but there are fewer conjectures in the Yale. The reason for them being fewer is that many times a change was made because someone saw a difficult reading, but it really wasn't that difficult. You could live with it, but they preferred something that would flow more easily for the reader. We'll see some examples here. In the 6 books, Volume 4, I considered 1,346 cases of conjectural emendation. That means I considered myself and suggestions from people, cases where there isn't textual support, that we're coming up with another reading. And I ended up accepting about 1 out of 4, 26%. And this, you'll see, is a pretty good mark of what's involved in this. It is worth pointing out, I said there were 113 that were new to the Yale. There are 187 that are common with our current text and the Yale edition. So there is an overlap. It isn't they're all different. 187 of them agree. Okay, next. Well, we're going to look at some of these. And I'm going to take some of the more prominent individuals who made conjectural emendations and look at one where we accept it and one where we reject it. At least I rejected it. So in our current text, there are 131 conjectures that come from Oliver Cowdery. And these will be ones that either made in the original, correcting something that someone else had written, or he corrected it in the printer's manuscript as he copied. There are 120 of those that are in the current text, so we've eliminated 11 of them, decided we didn't like them. There are 39 of those in the Yale edition, ends up being 30% are accepted. And this one out of this a little bit higher than 1 out of 4, so Oliver's actually doing pretty good. 1 Nephi 7:1 is an example which is accepted. It talks about that his son should take daughters to wife that might raise up seed. And that's the original reading. And Oliver, when he copied it, put in the pronoun they, the subject, because he felt like the sons with the daughters would be raising up seed. And this, I think, is correct. When we look at the rest of the Book of Mormon, when they talk about raising up seed, they don't mean rearing children. They don't mean changing diapers. We sometimes think this is, but what they mean is producing offspring. And every place in the Book of Mormon, it's both male and female that are raising up seed. This is the way the phrase is used in the text. So we have a scribe. This is one of the Whitmers, again, Christian probably. And we ask ourselves, does Christian Whitmer leave out subject pronouns? We want to see if there's really evidence for what we're doing. And we find, although there aren't examples of they, there are quite a few examples with I. He leaves out I very often. He's in a hurry, whatever he's doing, to write it down, and he will leave out subject pronouns. So this is not an impossible kind of thing. But given the rest of the text, it does seem right. And so the critical text has accepted this conjecture. This is a conjecture. Okay, next. This is one where Oliver's conjecture is rejected. So the original reads that it contained the fullness of the gospel of the land. Land. The gospel of the land. Now, you could probably work on it, and I think this is okay. But Oliver didn't think so. He made a conjecture. He changed it to Lord. It's even capitalized by this scribe. So he ends up doing Lord. In the critical text, I argue that it was probably lamb. The original is being dictated. You can mishear it. And so land, if you say the gospel of the lamb, you might hear lan without a D, you just hear a nasal, and thus misinterpret it. And I think that's what happened here. The scribe misinterpreted and thought it was land, wrote it. And if you look at the rest of the text, it talks about the gospel of the Lamb. It doesn't talk about the gospel of the Lord. There are no examples in the Book of Mormon of the gospel of the Lord. It makes sense, but it's not there. But the gospel of the Lamb is everywhere else. So this looks like a primitive mishearing, and we reject Oliver's suggested emendation. Okay, next. This is the typesetter. And he has a very high percentage, 47%. Not that he's inspired, but it's because he has dumb readings. Oliver is the scribe usually for the printers, and he'll sometimes write really dumb things. One time he wrote, the temporal baby. The printer's manuscript in one place reads the temporal baby. Now, it's supposed to be the temporal body. You can tell from the context. He typeset body. He gets credit for that. He gets credit. That's a conjecture, but it's pretty clear. Most of us reading the passage would say, oh yes, Oliver is thinking of something else. Okay, so here's an example which we accept, that other one we accepted too. But whoso shall lay their hands upon me shall wither even as a dried weed. Original reads this way. And the printers is copied this way. But the typesetter thought, no, I think it's reed. And I think he's right. There are too many weeds in upstate New York, and not enough reeds for them to think of that. But scripturally, we have examples where brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up, the reeds and flags shall wither. And it probably was reed, and Joseph probably, this is, again, it's being dictated. He says reed, but Oliver hears weed, and so that's what he wrote. And so we accept this conjecture. The next one. So in this one, the typesetter is looking at the printer's manuscript, and it says, yea, come unto me and bring forth works of righteousness, and ye shall not be put down. For modern English, to be put down, we would accept, but this is sort of a strange usage for those times. And the typesetter thought it should be, especially when you have it here in cast into the fire. And there's lots of Book of Mormon examples talking about people being hewn down and cast into the fire. So he substituted hewn for put. This is a conjecture. But I think it's cut down, and cast into the fire. The reason is, this would be, we don't have the original here, but I think if we had it, we would see it was cut with a capital C. Very often the scribes wrote their C's with capitals, and they write it with a big loop, and so if you look at it fast, you're going to think it's put. And so that's where I think the error came. It would have been from going from the O to P. It's a visual error. And you can find scriptural reference, although the Book of Mormon doesn't actually have any examples of cut down and cast into the fire. It only has hewn down. But I think this is one where there would have been cut down. We do have other scriptures, Jeremiah, cut down thy choice cedars and cast them into the fire. The use of the other verb does exist scripturally. So I think that's my conjecture. Okay, the next. Joseph Smith. He will do two major edits, one for the second edition and another for the third. The second edition is massive. Most of the editing, though, is grammatical, changing whiches to who, and we talked about that in the last lecture. But he also does conjectures, and Joseph makes a lot of changes. And a lot of it is due to the fact that he wants to make the text read easier for people. And a lot of those changes aren't really necessary. You can deal with them, but he probably was right in trying to make it easier. So he makes a lot of them, and thus they are rejected in the critical text because they aren't necessary. And you can support the original. And so there only ends up being, turns out there are a lot of them in our current edition, 174, but only 16%, about 1 out of every 6. In the 1840 edition, he doesn't make as many of these, and only 2 of them, it's 11%. So it's quite low. But this is what happens when you have an editor who is really engaging in the text and wants to make it easier to read. Okay. Here's one that we accept. And never has man come before me with such exceeding faith as thou hast. For were it so, ye could not have seen my finger. Were it so. It's just bizarre. And Joseph put in, for were it not so. And I think this is correct. And we can find lots of evidence for not being accidentally omitted in the text. There's 5 or 6 other places where scribes at various points omitted not. So it's not something that's unusual. Now, one that is rejected and is a difficult one is King Benjamin. This is when Ammon has found these people, and the people of Zeniff, who have become the people of Noah, then became the people of Limhi, and he announces that he can't translate, but King Benjamin has a gift from God, he can translate. But we just read earlier in Mosiah, Benjamin after 3 years had died. So he's not supposed to be alive. Now there's actually probably a mix-up in the way the text is telling its story. And he was still alive. It's at the end of the 3rd year. And you can read the arguments there, and Hugh Nibley is one that believed that Benjamin should also be restored. But Joseph Smith did change it to Mosiah, who was the reigning king back then. And but this doesn't look like a kind of error that you would make from visual or from hearing. It really was Benjamin, and it was Benjamin. He was still alive, but he wasn't the reigning king. It's like the Pope. Okay. Now, we can look at other editions to look at conjectures. They all have them. They run across difficult things they want to deal with. And you can see here is the total number they made. Here's how many are in your current text. And here is what's in the Yale. Notice These are probably mostly Talmage, although there is a committee and you could diffuse the responsibility. But 130, 129 are in our current text because we haven't changed much really from the 1920. But only 22, 17%. This is down at the Joseph Smith level because Talmage is an editor that wants you to have an easier read, and so he will make lots of conjectures. But they're not really necessary, even though they make the text a little difficult. Okay, next. These are scriptural scholars that came up with conjectures prior to the Critical Text Project. And they have a pretty good number. They usually didn't do too many, although Stan Larson and John Tvedtnes are two important individuals who provided conjectures. Tvedtnes for the Isaiah portions, and Stan Larson did work prior to the 1981. And some of them then are accepted in the Yale edition, and some are not. It's about half are accepted. The next one, well, there's me. So I thought of 401. And, you know, I wasn't always serious, but I'd see one and say, well, maybe this is this. I'm going to go through and try and see what it is. And I ended up with 26%. Rejecting, I accepted 103. And you can read them all and you can see if I'm out of bounds or not. They're in the book. It's on record. So this was the most interesting. As part of this project, farms sent out to all their email subscribers a request for emendations in the text. Something to the effect, if you have any suggestions for emendations in the text, would you please send them to Royal Skousen, gave my email. For the first 48 hours, I thought I'd made a big mistake. I was inundated with emails of three types. Brother Skousen, we would like to help you, but would you please tell us what an emendation is? So, okay, I answered. I told them, you know, it was a change in the text. But I also got things like, I thought the brethren cleaned all this up in the 1981 edition. There's nothing to change. It's all been done. And the other one is a little more serious one, why are you asking us? You know, the brethren can get it revealed to them. And so, you know, it was sort of this issue of whose responsibility, and should average members be doing this kind of thing. But fortunately, there were individuals who took the request seriously. And I might point out that the independence of this project made it so I could send out such an email. Just think about a suggestion in the Ensign to send in your suggestions to the brethren on how to change the text. It is a difficult, tender situation, and I can do it, you know, and I'll have to take the guff for not explaining what an emendation is. But so 42 individuals over the period of this sent in suggestions. 173 of them, that is particular, and sometimes they didn't have, they just said, I think something's weird here. You know, would you look at it? And sometimes I found things, 36, 21%. That means there are some really valuable readings in the Yale edition that are based on people sending in these. And there were 8 people that seemed, as they did it, to have gone through the whole text. They did it as a labor of love and of interest, and fed me suggestions all along. Ross Geddes, who is now deceased in Australia, was particularly helpful. He has 8 changes that are dependent upon him. And one individual on here, I won't mention who he is, but he is dyslexic. And because he's dyslexic, for him to read the text, he sees things we normal readers don't see. And he had a number of really valuable, and some of those are there. One thing that's valuable is these are not known. I think now some of these people, David has and Heather, have published, are publishing scholars, but at the time where you would identify them as sort of lay members of the church who were interested in the text. There's some advantage to this. I didn't actually get really anything from religion faculty. There's a reason. They are used to taking whatever they have there and figuring it out. But these people are reading the text and saying, whoa, I don't understand this. And there is an advantage to having the sort of naive attempt to just understand the text. And I'm grateful that we did this. And it made this whole project much more public. When someone would suggest a change, I always made the analysis and sent it back to them. I wanted them to know that I valued it and that maybe I didn't accept it. I always invited them to send more, but sometimes, you know, they had a suggestion which I thought was valuable. And the church can't do this either. If you send a suggestion to the Church Scriptures Committee, they will thank you and thank you. They can't do what I did. And so I think, I mean, Dan referred to the independence of this, but it has many important aspects that have freed the work on the text of the Book of Mormon in a way that couldn't be otherwise done. Okay, next. So now I come to an issue of, I'm going to start talking about the text itself, and my belief that this text was given to Joseph Smith through the instrument. He could see the actual words of English. He could see the names, even the Bible names. He could see them all. It was written out in Roman letters. And one of the evidences for this are constructions which are Hebrew-like. I'm going to say Hebrew-like, not Hebraisms, because I want to make a distinction here, but are Hebrew-like that show that Joseph Smith had to see these little unimportant words. If he were just getting ideas, he wouldn't have put these in because they're not in English. Now, you can find Hebraisms in the Book of Mormon that are also in the King James Bible. So you could say on those, well, Joseph, you know, just knew his Bible really well. But these you're not going to find in the King James Bible because translators won't put them in. And the first one has to do with an extra and one example would be something like, if you come, and I will come. This is literal Hebrew. You have an extra and, what we would consider extra and, before that main clause. The Book of Mormon does not have these examples. What it has instead are cases where the subordinate clause is complex. It either adds an additional thing or has something parenthetical which breaks the flow. And almost every time, I won't say every, but almost every time the original text has an and. So it would be something like, if you come, and surely you should, and I will come. Now see, this is interruptive. Or you could have something like, if you come, and if your mother-in-law comes, if you added that, you know, and I will come. These were in the original text, and they were not only with if, but with all other subordinate constructions. So we're going to see some. It isn't just if. Okay, so this is with as, and as I cast my eyes around about, and then there's the extra part, that perhaps I might discover my family also, and I beheld a river of water. That's the way the original text reads. That's the way the Yale text reads. We don't like this. This is not what we expect in English. It doesn't occur in dialects. It doesn't occur in the history of the language, but it's in the original text. And The and was removed, this time Oliver Cowdery. When he copied it into the printers, he just, you know, it was one of those Whitmers. He probably said, oh, it's one of theirs. They goofed again. So he just took it out. Okay, well, he'll have some himself that he'll keep. So this is with because. And because he speaketh flattering words unto you, and he saith that all is well. See, there's the extra one. And then ye will not find no fault with him. Now, you have to live with the multiple negative. That's okay. English has always had multiple negatives. Okay, next is when, and when Nephi had brought forth the records and laid them before him, there's that extra one, and laid them before him, and he cast his eyes upon them and saith, extra and. Mormon 3 and 4, and it came to pass that after this 10th year had passed away, making in the whole 360 years from the coming of Christ, and the king of the Lamanites sent an epistle unto me. Sometimes the typesetter is removing the ands. He just, at the end, the typesetter, he wasn't supposed to change the grammar, but I think he just decided at the end, these just aren't right. I'm taking them out. Next. This is while, and it came to pass that while he was journeying thither, being weighed down with sorrow, wading through much tribulation and anguish of soul, and there's actually more. Then it says, and it came to pass that while Alma was thus weighed down with sorrow, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared unto him, saying, this is pretty contorted syntax, but it's got the extra and. And finally, one of the most famous verses in the Book of Mormon's got it. This is, and if you shall ask with a sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ, there's the extra stuff, and he will manifest the truth of it unto you. Joseph Smith removed this one. Now you may say, okay, there's so many ands in the Book of Mormon, 16,000 or so by my count, there's something. They just made mistakes. They're just throwing in ands. Well, in the next one, it isn't just an accident. There's 7 of them in a row in Helaman 12, 13 through 21. And they're all there originally. And this is the first one, yea, and if he saith unto the earth, move. There's your interruptive element. And it is moved. The and was removed by Joseph Smith. He's going to edit these out because you are going to have trouble understanding the text. Next one. And this is the second one. Yea, if he say unto the earth, thou shalt go back, that it lengthen out the day for many hours, and it is done. And here's the last one. I skipped the other ones, but they're all in a row. Every and is there. So, what does this mean about Joseph Smith's translation? He is seeing the and. He's being faithful to it, and he's dictating it. If he's getting ideas in his mind, it ought to be English with no ands. But it isn't. It's something else. Now, it's not exactly Hebrew, because if you have short ones in the Book of Mormon, there are never any ands. So we can't say it's exactly the same as Hebrew, but it is systematic and it is different. And to me, it shows he is seeing ands, and he's faithfully reading them off. Okay. And there's even an inverted conditional clause. That sounds complicated. It's intended to. But we have these in English. And had they awoke the Lamanites, we would normally like if today, but had they awoke the Lamanites, behold, they were drunken. So there's your interruptive clause. And the Nephites could have slain them. There's that and. And this one's never been removed. Occasionally they sneak through. It's good. Okay. Now, this one is one of the most controversial, and Dan referred to it. It's that there's vocabulary, words that we understand basically today, but they have different meanings. And the meanings can be found in English from the 15 and 1600s, but as far as we know, have died out. Now, some people claim that since they're in the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon, these must be relics from upstate New York English. The burden of proof is on these people to go find them in upstate New York in the 1800s. because the Oxford English Dictionary and all the databases are showing that these meanings are gone from basically 1700. In fact, the Book of Mormon, as far as I know, doesn't have a word in it with a meaning that isn't at least 100 years old. Now you think about how you might be able to do a text, a religious text or any text, and avoid using any words or words that are already in English that have changed with meaning in the last 100 years. You wouldn't even know. You know, it's not like we have Oxford English dictionaries, you know, that we're carrying around in our brains. It's an archaic text. Now, you can find some of them, some of the meanings for these words in the King James Bible. There are some, but there's going to be, most of them are not. No. So this is one that is to cast, to shoot. The Lamanites could not cast their stones and their arrows at them. Cast their stones, we don't have a problem with that, but casting arrows. Now there are people that like to go out and find cases where Amerindians are throwing arrows like darts. But that's not really necessary when you discover that actually English from the 15 and 1600s used the verb cast with arrows to mean to shoot. And the Oxford English Dictionary gives this meaning and says that it was used, their citations date from 1300 to 1609. Now, they probably went longer. They weren't there when the last one died out. You know, it's going to go a little bit longer, but this is strange, to cast their arrows. But you can see it in the Bible. So you could say, Joseph Smith, he is a genius. He knows that Bible so well. He can imitate it. Now, I'm not a fan of that idea. I think Joseph is faithfully reading off a text, and it's pretty miraculous. We mustn't belittle this just because we think reading's easy. This is a different kind of text that he's reading. Okay, well, the next one. This will be in the King James. Okay, this is required. Enos. The Lord says to Enos, thy fathers have also required of me this thing. And we look at that and say, you know, Nephi and Lehi and Jacob were so faithful, they just forced the Lord to do it. They required it. However, in the Oxford English Dictionary, you will find citations from these periods where it means to request. And we can find a Bible one, for I was ashamed to require of the king a band of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy in the way. They didn't want to request the king. Well, so this is another Bible example. The next one is an interesting one, because if you realize that you might be dealing with 15 and 1600 vocabulary, maybe some of the readings we give to a text should be rethought. So this one. So, and again, Alma commanded that the people of the church should impart of their substance, every one according to that which he hath. And if he have more abundantly, he should impart more abundantly. And he that hath but little should be required. Now, we can take that in our modern meaning of forced, the implication of forced, but maybe it just means requested, asked. Little was asked of those who didn't have much. It's something worth thinking about, that other words, this may apply to other words that we have traditionally thought of as more required. Okay. Wrapped. Wrapped originally, or at least during one of the definitions, 1350 to 1662, means to roll. Not to wrap up a pack, but roll it. And we have one that's pretty clear in the Book of Mormon that should be interpreted this way, and the earth should be wrapped together as a scroll. Scrolls are not wrapped up like Christmas gifts. You'll wreck them. So Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters. The word in Hebrew is to roll it up. It's going to be sort of like a stick-like object. It isn't a little package, his coat. It isn't going to work if it's that interpretation. Okay, next. So, here are some that are not in the King James Bible. That were, and some of these have been removed from your text because they are difficult. So, but if, meaning unless, it was used from 1200 to 596, or at least the citations in the Oxford English Dictionary. For the natural man, this is a famous passage, for the natural man is an enemy to God and will be forever and ever, but if he yieldeth to the enticings of the Holy Spirit. And it means unless. And Talmage and the committee changed it to unless, removed but if. But we have examples. Here's one from Philip Sidney, 1580. He did not like that maids should once stir out of their father's houses, but if it were to milk a cow. A real tyrant. Okay, next. To commend, meaning to recommend someone to do something. They actually only, in the current, at least the second edition, the printed one, they only have one citation, 1647. But in Ether it says, and now I would commend you to seek this Jesus. Commend you. We would say recommend that you seek this Jesus. And here we have an example. It isn't in the King James Bible. Some friend shall commend the party inquiring to accept of some employment very advantageous. Recommend that they accept this. Okay. To counsel. The original text of the Book of Mormon has two examples of to counsel someone, meaning to counsel with. First one's nice. I mean, some of you may prefer this. Counsel the Lord in all thy doings. So just telling. But that isn't really what it means. And this one's very clear. Counsel your elder brothers in your undertakings, because if you read the rest of the context, it means take advice from them. And so the 1920 edition adds with, which is the correct mean. But in according to the Oxford English, they give these citations. These are pretty early. This is, and maybe it made it up to the 1600s. You know, we just don't have citations sometimes. But this is really a good example. Moses counseled the Lord and thereupon advised his subjects what was to be done. So he counseled with the Lord told him, and then he told the people. That's what it means. And this was used. So the Book of Mormon's got two of these. And we add the with so that it obscures the old reading. Okay, next. This is one of my favorites, to depart, meaning to part. Divide, separate. So we have Helaman 8 and 11, and the typesetter just didn't believe it. So, to smite upon the waters of the Red Sea, and they departed hither and thither, and he just changed this to parted. The waters parted. Moses parts the waters. However, in English, departed meant to part, and was used even in Bibles up to the King James. But the King James translators got rid of every meaning of depart, which meant to part, because it had become archaic. So they removed it. So Joseph Smith can't get this meaning. Now you could say, well, that Oliver Cowdery, when he copied this, just goofed. You know, and you can go down this whole list and keep saying, yeah, and he goofed, and he goofed, and they goofed, and they dropping the withs, and so forth. But in my mind, these are all piling up on one side. In any event, this is the Geneva Bible from 1557. This is the New Testament. They departed my raiment among them. Means they parted. In fact, that's the King James. Look, they just said, we're not going to have that departed there. That's weird. It had become archaic by then. The next one is one of my favorites, till death us depart. This is the way the prayer is supposed to be read. And if you decide you want an Anglican marriage, you should insist on depart. But in 1662, it becomes so archaic, everyone was used to depart, so you put in the helping do verb, so you sneak it by people. Depart. Okay. Next one. To detect. Probably this one we've all read over and we haven't had any problem with it, but I think it's worth considering. The definition of detect, meaning to expose, used in this period of time. And now behold, we will detect this man. We'll figure him out. That's usually the way we interpret. The people are going to figure out Nephi because he is, you know, in cahoots with somebody to kill the chief judge. And he shall confess his sins. But if you interpret as expose, it really works really quite well. And behold, we will expose this man. We'll bring it out in the open. And he will confess his fault. And here we have an example from Richard Hooker. The gentlewoman goeth forth and detecteth herself of a crime. You can detect yourself. It means you expose yourself. Okay. Extinct, you're dead. Now, today, extinct means you're not going to be able to produce. Your species usually isn't going to be able to produce anything. The whole species is wiped out. But originally, extinct has to do with extinguish. Your light goes out. Your body gets cold. You die. And it was used this way in English up to 1674. That's the last citation. Inflict the wound, it is an alma, and there's actually several others in the Book of Mormon. They've never been changed, these. Because you can sort of figure out, you know, if you're personally extinct, you are extinct. And inflict the wounds of death in your bodies that ye may become extinct. And here's an English translation of the Prince, the Pope being dead and Valentine extinct. Okay, next. To hurl. Now, for us, hurl means to throw. But there's some feeling here that actually this might, in this passage in Helaman, that it actually means to drag. And this is one of the meanings, 1305 to 1663. Yea, how could ye have given away, this actually is an archaic expression, to the enticing of him who art seeking to hurl away your souls down to everlasting misery and endless woe. Now you can think of it as casting you down into hell. And there are ways of referring to that way. But in this particular one, it may mean, as it did in, at least the OED claims, this one you can't tell from the context. We probably have to go read the thing as a context, but he says that this hurled, they say this hurled means to drag or pull with violence, but you can't tell it from this. But in any event, this, if you're going to translate this, you maybe don't want to say to throw, but actually to drag down to hell. Okay, next. To pitch battle. We have a phrase, a pitched battle. And most of us just think, you know, this is a battle, they're really going at it. But what it really means is you set up both sides of the array for battle before you engage, before you go at each other. And Helaman uses it in the Archaic, in the actual verbal use, 1470 to 1655, and they came down again that they might pitch battle against the Nephites. That kind of means to set up and fight. And our battle then in martial manner pitched. This is Christopher Marlowe. But all we have today left is this pitched battle. And so the Book of Mormon is using it in an archaic way that is old. Okay, next. This one is really sort of striking. I don't have one actually in the right period. It only gives us earlier. But rebellion is used, and he began to stir his people up in rebellion against my people. This is the Lamanite king their people are over Zeniff's people. Can you stir up people that are above you in rebellion? And I only have this earlier use, so this is one that needs some more work on it. But in this particular, if a man should have this rebellion in contrariety against another when they are of diverse complexions. But it means, rebellion means you're just in opposition. It's not hierarchical. When I say I'm in rebellion, it implies I'm rebelling against authority above me. You know, if you rebel against your kids, it means they're ruling the house. Okay, next. Archaic conjectures. this is probably the most controversial part, and I thought I ought to keep you awake by putting the two most controversial ones. If you can have conjectures in the Book of Mormon, and you can have 15 and 1600 language, are there any conjectures that only work in the 15 and 1600s? I think there are two, so I'm going to give them to you. They are food for thought, not set in cement. Okay. So we have in Mosiah 19:24 the printer's manuscript basically that reads that it came to pass that after they had ended the ceremony that they returned to the land of Nephi. These are the people that burnt Noah at the stake, and the priests escaped, and they're reporting to Gideon what they have done. And when they're done, and they're glad to hear that their own families were preserved, and they're going to go back to the city. So it's got ceremony. And actually this was proposed by one of my research assistants, Renee Bangeter. I asked her to go out and hunt for something that might look like ceremony, but could be something else, because I don't really like ceremony here. It is a difficult reading, I think. Now, some people say, oh, anytime you have a discussion, it's a ceremony. So you can get away with this. But the Book of Mormon, I don't think, really uses cultic kinds of language this way. In any event, I asked her to look. She only could come up with one, and it was sermon. But sermon here would have to mean something like talk or discussion, not what I'm doing right now. If I'm preaching to you, see, it's a sermon. It's now narrowed in meaning. But back, as we shall see the next one, it had the meaning, originally ended from Latin, meaning talk or discourse. And here are two examples from late 1500s. Out of my brain, I made his sermon flow, his conversation, his talk. Desiring Don Infilego, with very mild sermon, talk, you're trying to be patient, to be friends with Medicimo again. So, what would happen if Joseph said sermon? And Oliver writes it with a C, C-E-R-M-O-N. We don't have the original, but I propose that he misspelled it. We have lots of evidence from spelling errors that they would make this kind of spelling error. Then when Oliver came to copy it, he made the change from sermon to ceremony because he doesn't recognize what he had written earlier. Well, it's something to think about. I don't really like ceremony there because it's so gratuitous. It doesn't really fit. But I know that many people have figured out ways for it to fit. So I'm going to leave it. Okay, the next one is even more controversial. Before the bar of God. So we have two references in the Book of Mormon to being before the pleasing bar of God. The first one is negative in context. Until I shall meet you before the pleasing bar of God, which bar striketh the wicked with awful dread and fear. But of course, us righteous will be pleased. You can think of it that way. Moroni 10:4, to meet you before the pleasing bar of the great Jehovah, the eternal judge of both quick and dead. Here it's neutral. But there's actually no reference here or anywhere at being at the bar of God that is positive in the Book of Mormon. It's either neutral or it's negative. So these are the two with pleasing bar, and the next ones, there are three more, just talk about the bar of God, and these are negative, to stand with shame and awful guilt before the bar of God. And there are 6 of them, this is one from Alma, and being brought before the bar of God to be judged according to our works. This is neutral. But there's none saying, and we righteous will stand before the bar of God and be exonerated of the wonderful things we did. Because I have a feeling we might have some things revealed there we might make us not too pleased. In any event, so the suggestion by Christian Jelinek, next one, was that this is a legal term from the 1600s, meaning pleading bar. It is the bar that you stand in front of in a courtroom where you make your pleading. And the pleading is a neutral term. It doesn't mean you're pleading, it just means you're making your case. The evidence that you're being tried upon. And these are two literary ones that I found on Literature Online, and they're both from the 1600s, early 1600s. If you deny my claim, here I will prove it, this field, the court, this list, where you have jousting, my pleading bar, I will be tried right here. And John Webster, who passed the bar, no joke, they called it, he was accepted into one of the temples of law in London in 1598. He is a lawyer. He writes plays about the law. Fortune hath lift thee to my chair and thrown me headlong to thy pleading bar. Now, we don't know this term, and I don't think Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery had any idea what it was. We have some other evidence for this pleading bar. One is that although we can't find it in courtroom accounts of cases because you don't refer to the furniture of the court in going through a case, but there is a legal index that was prepared, 12 handwritten leaves for an unidentified law book. They've now been separated from it, dated 21st of January 16th. The top of the 8th leaf reads, pleading bar and travers, which is French, law French for pleading, or for denial, excuse me. So this means pleading bar and denial. So it's got an index of terms and where this book talks about when you stand before the pleading bar and the denial that you might make of the accusations. So it basically means denial in pleading. The term can be found. It really exists. Now, the term pleasing bar can be found too, but they're in Las Vegas and San Francisco. Okay. So, and there is a museum near Canterbury in Forditch, England, where they give tours and they talk about, they have the term and they refer to the pleading bar, and there's some pictures online of an actual bar where they would stand. And in those days, the court cases were done without written pleas. They're oral pleas. You make your defense standing there, and you have the constable standing beside you so you won't flee. You get to stand there. And they didn't take forever. Maybe they should have, but okay. The next one. So could this happen? That Joseph either sees pleading bar and reads off pleasing bar, or Oliver, hearing pleading bar, just replaces it. And we have lots of evidence that Oliver isn't as educated as some people want to think. Even Oliver. Later, he will write so eruditely, that's a good word, and he will write this way, and you will think he is really up to it. But when he was the scribe, he doesn't know as much as maybe you and I know. And so one of them was, he twice wrote, behold, the scriptures are before you. If ye will arrest them, it shall be to your own destruction. For behold, some have arrested the scriptures and have gone far astray because of this thing. But we mustn't make fun of Oliver because the typesetter put arrest. Now, rest, we don't even use this. We have the word wrestle, which comes from rest, and rest means to twist. You twist the scriptures, and wrestlers twist themselves up. That's where that comes from. So, I'm pretty sure Joseph read off rest, but Oliver wrote arrest in two different places. And so I'm proposing he did the same thing with pleading bar. It just didn't make any sense, a bar that's pleading. And so he changed it to pleasing bar. Okay. Here are some other ones that he messed up. We already saw the first one, shall wither even as a dried weed. The bosom of destruction, this is a great one. It's supposed to be the besom of destruction. We don't even know that word. It means the broom of destruction. And he didn't know it, so he wrote the bosom of destruction. I like it. My soul was wrecked with eternal torment. It's supposed to be racked, and this was kept up to 1879 before people realized it's probably racked. They drink the drugs of a bitter cup instead of dregs. Some fraction in the government. Oliver doesn't recognize faction, dregs, racked, besom, of course not, and read. He didn't see it there. And I propose he didn't see arrest, and he didn't see pleading bar as even being viable. Okay. Now, everybody's made fun of the Book of Mormon for its bad grammar. And I think Moroni warned us about it. Said, you may make fun of the mistakes and so forth, but we don't really know of mistakes. But everybody found all of these things. Well, one of the things that we're doing now in the project is to study the bad grammar. Is it really bad grammar? And here's one of the worst. Everyone laughs at this. Yea, if my days could have been in them days. See, even you think it's pretty hickish. This is Joseph Smith's contribution, right? That's what people have interpreted this as, and it was changed quite late, 1906, in the LDS, first time. We kept it a long time. This one Joseph Smith changed, and this shall be your language in them days. Changed to in those days, 1837. He got that one, okay? But this is what's really striking. This is standard usage in early modern English, and it's found in academic writing. So we have Robert Barrett, 1598, the theoric and practic of modern wars. This is not, Geneva Road language. For the wars and weapons are now altered from them days. And we are laughing. But we're the ones that are wrong. I think we are. I think we ought to be a little humble. People have said God couldn't give this because God doesn't speak this language. He speaks my correct English. That's what B.H. Roberts basically said. He said it's blasphemy to say that God would give the Book of Mormon in bad English. But maybe he didn't give it in bad English. Maybe he just gave it in 15 and 1600 English. I think we should keep an open mind on this subject and not ridicule the book. 4 of them logs make a cab. Annotations upon the Pentateuch. This is a scholarly work, and it's got the usage which we think is dialectal, non-standard, and unacceptable. Okay, we're studying this. Consistent usage. These are the interesting ones. There are 131 of these I'm going to just say something about the language of the vocabulary. If Joseph Smith is translating from his own ideas, how come he's got all this vocabulary from 15 and 1600s? It just shouldn't be there. Unless you take the view, since it is there, it must be Joseph Smith. I mean, that's such a circular, it's not even an argument. Well, okay. One of the really striking things I found was when we found a variant, very often if we cleaned it up, we got rid of the exception. It was an exception that was created usually by a typesetter. So here are some. Whatsoever was originally 75 to 0 in the original. In the current text, there are 2 of them. We got rid of one of the whatsoevers. I think Joseph Smith removed it in his editing. But whatever. There are 2 whatevers. It isn't in the original text. And conditions is always in the plural, 14 to 0. But now there are 2 of them, because we like it in the singular. The tendency for us is to change this text towards what we expect. This time, the present time, is always referred to in the singular, never in these times. We use it in the plural this way, and we've got one of them in the current text, but none in the original. Next. We observe to keep the commandments. We don't observe the commandments. There's a distinction maybe here. But the original is 11-0, and there's one where to keep was dropped out. When the text refers to ending a period of time, like the 45th year or something like that, it's always in the past tense, but there are 4 of them now which are in the present, because it gives an immediacy. We sort of like this. To do iniquity, you don't do iniquities. It's sort of a mass thing. And 22-0, but there's one exception. These are wrinkles in the text. These don't make any difference as far as translation goes. But they're showing this text is being highly controlled, surprisingly so. Next, if it so be that, never if it be so that, but it's 34-2. 3 of them were deleted by Joseph Smith. 39-0 in the original. To have hope, you never use it as a past participle, to have hoped. Joseph made this one change himself. He is not the author of the text. I'm going to be mentioning this. It isn't his text. 18-0. The Nephites and the Lamanites, just repeating the every time, not the Nephites and Lamanites. In Sunday school, we always say the Nephites and Lamanites. We're going to drop this thing. 15-0. There are 131 like this. I've just given you 9. 131. It's very systematic. Okay, well, what's the opposite side of the coin? Did we ever restore anything that was unique? We did, but it's not as much. This is unusual. Usually in textual studies, it goes the other way. Unique readings are quite frequent. But we do have some, and we'll just show, let's see, there are 34 unique readings created by the work. And this one's an interesting one. Ye have sought to murder us, and we have only sought to defend our lives. The original is a real contrast. You're trying to kill us, and we're just defending our lives. And it becomes a more, we defend ourselves. It's not so much your life now, it's just we're defending ourselves. And it is true, the rest of the text has only to defend oneself. It doesn't have this. So sometimes you get a unique reading. You just have to be prepared for this. You just go with it. But the 131 is really, they're so high, the numbers, you say somebody is paying awful attention to phraseology. Okay, next. Here we have an example. This was discovered by Jack Welch originally, that if you believe Joseph Smith is getting ideas and he's just got to sort of frame the language, it still has to be very precise. And here is an example where Lehi, it says in 1 Nephi, and he thought he saw, now it's going to quote, so to speak, God sitting upon his throne, surrounded with numberless concourses of angels in the attitude of singing and praising their God. This is pretty precise language and pretty long. When Alma refers to the same event of Lehi, seeing this event, yea, and methought I saw, even as our father Lehi saw, God sitting upon his throne, surrounded with numberless concourses of angels in the attitude of singing and praising their God. It is word for word the same. Okay, Joseph Smith has an incredible memory. And that's okay. You know, I believe that if Joseph Smith had died shortly after the publication of the Book of Mormon, no church organization, but 5,000 copies of this book are out there. I believe today there would be centers at Yale and Harvard for the study of this book. But it's hard for these people to do that because usually they're introduced by the book by 2 elders standing at their door. And this is going to cause them to change their life. And that we don't want to do. So, but in any event, You know, either you give Joseph Smith credit and say he's the greatest genius that ever was on the face of the earth, or you give it to the Lord who provided the translation. I tend to be of the second group. Okay, and this is one that's also precise. It's liturgical. And he shall be called Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Father of heaven and of earth, the creator of all things from the beginning. This is in Mosiah 3, King Benjamin. And here we have Helaman. And also that you might know of the coming of, and this is Samuel, quoting the same liturgical-like language. It's interesting that our current text has lost this of, so it doesn't look quite identical. Now I'm going to look at the other side of the coin. Are there phrases which are almost identical? Yes, you have to keep this in mind, so we'll do one. So this one is Alma's conversion and the angel speaking to him. This is the one in Mosiah, which is quite different. But we have these two in Alma, and they're almost alike, except for the placement of thyself. If thou wilt of thyself be destroyed, seek no more to destroy the church of God. And this one, he quotes it 2 verses later, and when the angel said to me, if thou wilt be destroyed of thyself, seek no more. And the textual evidence supports the difference. We're not going to go in and change to one of the other to make it uniform. Where we find evidence for uniformity, we take it. Where we find they're different, we are going to stay with the difference. It's something, though, to study much more than we have studied. Okay, next. The biblical language is, everyone is aware of all these quotes. You know, the Isaiah passage and Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, and so forth. And people really concentrate on these. But what is more interesting, I think, from a textual study would actually be the paraphrastic references to King James expressions out of the blue almost. They are so well woven in, it's not as if somebody says, oh, I'm going to quote from Hebrews here. It's just woven in as if they know Hebrews really well. And this is an example where we'll see that. Well, we'll see that in a moment. This one is a very interesting one where John the Baptist, when he sees the Savior coming, he refers to him down here in John 1 and 29. He says, the next day John seeth Jesus coming unto him and saith, behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. It's in the singular. It's in the singular in the Greek. Okay, the next we will see there are 2 references in the Book of Mormon to John the Baptist's words about the Savior. And both of them originally were in the singular. So here they are. And it says in this one that he had baptized the Lamb of God, which should take away the sin of the world. And Oliver first copied it in the singular, and then he changed it to the plural. So he just thought plural was better. And then in 2 Nephi, he actually copied the singular. I have spoken unto you concerning that prophet that should baptize the Lamb of God, which should take away the sin of the world. Sins. The typesetter changed this one. So it gets changed. The reason it's being changed is we expect sins of the world, not this singular. But where the Book of Mormon is just referring to John, and you track it right to the Gospel of John, you get the singular. Everywhere else, it's in the plural. So the other 2, the next, here we have 15 times, it's all sins, and they refer to Christ, but they're not referring to what John said. They were just referring in general, and they're all in the plural. This text is paying really close attention to that King James passage from John 1 and 29, when it wants to. But otherwise, it does the plural. Okay, the next one. This is an astounding one. because I didn't realize what I was dealing with. But I noticed, this is Alma 40. Now this is the state of the souls of the wicked, yea, in darkness, and a state of awful, fearful looking for of the fiery indignation of the wrath of God upon them. Now that is awful syntax. I mean, if you think that's good syntax, well, we're not speaking the same. A state of awful, fearful looking for of. That of is obnoxious. And the 1841 typesetter took it out. Just took it out. And it does read better then, in a state of awful, fearful, looking for the fiery indignation of the wrath. That's sort of what we like. Well, let's turn to the next. So this, I repeated it, but I put in bold. This is Hebrews 10, 26, 27. There remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation which shall devour the adversaries. The of is there. And this fearful looking for of, and then there's fiery indignation. This is being quoted, and it's being quoted very specifically. And it's the King James Bible. Next one. It's not Tyndale. Tyndale is a better translator. Here it is. And you'll notice there's hardly any difference. This word is changed. It's willfully and it's willingly. I like willingly. Willfully sounds like who knows. But willingly, you know what that means. If we sin willingly, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a fearful looking for judgment and violent fire which shall devour the adversaries. Now I like it. And notice, no of. No of in Tyndale. Okay? But I like violent fire, but we'll see where. You understand Tyndale. It was made for the plowboy. The King James Bible is so you won't understand it. Now, I know that that's heresy. Okay. I'll back away from that. Okay, next one. So this is the Geneva Bible, which predates. And you will see here, they put the of in. Or maybe it was done, I'd have to check actually, there is the Great Bible prior to this. But it says, notice it's willingly, still Tyndale, but a fearful looking for of judgment and violent fire. So they put the of in, or they've got it. Maybe it came from the Great Bible. Okay, so the of is now there, but this will be, fiery indignation will come from the 1611. Now, this has been woven in so neatly, I don't think any of us would recognize this, mainly because we don't know Hebrews. Maybe some of you have just, oh yes, that's Hebrews. We should probably look at our Bible to see if it's cross-referenced. Okay, well, we'll just see. I don't know. I haven't looked. Okay, next. So finally we have letter-for-letter control. And we've already talked about these. The spelling out of the names, when they first occur, they're phonetically spelled, and then they're corrected very often in line, and choriantimer cannot be spelled unless you spell it out letter for letter. Joseph Smith saw the spelling of names. We have evidence that they did the spelling for the difficult Book of Mormon names. Generally, they let the biblical names pass. I think he could see the biblical names. If they were required, he could have spelled out them, but he didn't. They knew that when the typesetter got a hold of it, they know how to spell Isaiah or Messiah. So let's see, though. So here's scribe in the original Scribes 2 and 3, the Whitmer boys. Isaiah. Nazareth is pronounced, probably, it's a pronunciation I've discovered. Nazareth is actually a pronunciation of the time for Nazareth. And this would have been Christian Whitmer. Messiah, Pharaoh. But lest you think Oliver is perfect, here's his Pharaoh. They're not going to even ask for Pharaoh. Okay? But sometimes they do ask for biblical names, apparently. So the next We have Gilgal, which appears in Ether, and it's a valley of Gilgal. It's a biblical name, but it's not used in a biblical context. And it's spelled with a double L, and later Oliver goes in and crosses that L out. So they must have asked, he isn't checking a Bible, to find this thing. And so there is evidence that if they needed, they would do it. The misspelling of names in the Isaiah quotations are apparently just left. They misspelled them all. If you go through Isaiah, the part chapter 2 through 14, almost all those names are misspelled. They don't correct them. The typesetter corrected them. He got his King James Bible out and corrected them, but one of them he forgot. He didn't think he needed to correct Ramoth. It was an error. It should be Ramah. And some people have made a big deal out of this being the old feminine historic ending in Semitic and so forth. No, this came because before it is Hamath and Hayoth, which are correct, and Oliver just wrote Ramoth because he had been predisposed by Hamath and Ayoth to put the TH on. And the typesetter was too. He didn't look it up. This is a simple error. But there's a lot of people writing about old feminine endings and so forth in Semitic. You have to be careful. At least I know I'm causing trouble. Okay, next. If Joseph Smith is seen, could he have misread what he was seeing? The Lord said that the translation was correct, and I believe that meant what he was seeing through the instrument was correct. But Joseph has to read it off correctly. Are there any mistakes in the original which show a visual misreading, not a mishearing? And there are two, I think. So this one here, neither will the Lord God suffer that the Gentiles shall forever remain in that state of awful woundedness which thou beholdest that they are in. And Joseph didn't like this either. In 37, he changed it to blindness. So your text reads blindness. But I think it's an error for wickedness. And wickedness doesn't sound like woundedness, but it looks like it. And so this is why I think Joseph, woundedness is pretty strange in any event. So if we look at other places, we have this reference, next one, into a state of unbelief and awful wickedness, in a state of such awful wickedness, in a state of awful wickedness, in your awful state of wickedness. And I think the fifth one is also wickedness, but this would mean that Joseph himself misread what he was viewing. Well, we'll have to find out someday. Next. And this is, I think, another error like this. I knew not whether they were cleansed from mortality to immortality, speaking of the three Nephites. And we don't have the original, but we have P and the 1830, the printers, and they're both first-hand copies of the original, and they both read cleansed. So probably the original read cleansed. But I think this is a visual error for changed. The Book of Mormon doesn't treat the human body as needing to be cleansed, or it is cleansed when it is resurrected. But it is changed, and other references argue for that. We'll see them here. So that man should rise from the dead and be changed from this mortal to an immortal state, or this is referring again to the Savior speaking to the three Nephites, and when I shall come in my glory, ye shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye from mortality to immortality. So I think what Joseph actually saw was changed, but he misread it as cleansed. Again, we'll have to wait. But the Yale edition puts them in. There wasn't a committee to vote, or I would have lost. Okay. So there is actual evidence. I'm getting to the end. So there's actually evidence, I believe, in the text itself that says that the plates existed and there was a translation somehow in English attached to it. A computer file, I don't know, but actually attached somehow to the plates. The plates weren't directly used, but they were in the vicinity, on the table, Emma said, wrapped up. And when Joseph goes up from Susquehanna area up to the Whitmers to translate, Moroni carries the plates. If you don't need the plates, why are they even there? I would suggest there was something that the plates and the translation are connected, associated. And here we have things from words from 2 Nephi 27. The words of the book shall be read by the power of Christ. The Lord God will deliver again the book and the words thereof to him that is not learned. This is Joseph Smith. He will have the plates and he will have the words. Wherefore thou shalt read the words which I shall give unto thee. And I believe that's what happened. Joseph Smith got the words. We call him the translator. Joseph Smith called himself the translator. But when we look at Joseph Smith's use of the word translate, he seems to mean transmitter. I am the one through whom it was transmitted. When we have the article of faith that says we believe in the Bible as far as it is translated correctly, I think he meant transmitted correctly. If we believe translated correctly, then just give up on the King James, go get your Greek New Testament, your Hebrew Bible, and that should be it. But anybody that studies those knows there's huge variations in those. There are lots of changes that took place in those texts. So I think he was even saying there, we believe in the Bible as far as it has been transmitted correctly, and Joseph Smith is the transmitter of the Book of Mormon. I believe it's a revealed text, word for word, from him. When thou hast read the words which I have commanded thee, and the Lord shall say unto him that shall read the words that shall be delivered him, it's speaking very specifically of these words, and I think they existed and they were a part, in some sense, with the plates. So, where can you read these words today? Well, you will eventually be able to find them securely stored in various archives, including the special collections of the BYU Library. Or you can find them in the 6 books of Volume 4 of the critical text, along with the evidence that the original text read that way. Or online, you can find a variety of lists that people are now constructing, although some of these lists rely on manuscript readings without any textual analysis. I'm not thrilled by these lists. And you can write these individual changes into your own personal scriptures, with the hope that someday the correct readings will be published in an official version. Or you can read them right now in the Book of Mormon, the earliest text, published by Yale University. And you can read them out loud, much like Joseph Smith did to his scribes over 180 years ago. This has been the major goal of the Critical Text Project, to restore the original text to the extent possible and to make it publicly available. Thank you very much.
If you think he's done, he's not. He's going to answer questions. We'll first have a closing prayer, but I want to say something. I think I know Royal well enough that if I say something that's really stupid, when he gets up to answer the questions, he will set it straight, right? Yeah, you'll set me straight, yes. So I'm going to say something that he may not like, but I think he said it before. I'll just have to try and say it in my own words. What Royal has done is a magnificent, monumental, scholarly work. I don't believe that he is saying that his Yale edition is supposed to replace what we have as the canonized version. I think he fully supports that. What he's talking about in the Yale edition, what he's done in these last 3 lectures, is what we as scholars of the text should be looking at. Now, I hope I haven't phrased it too weirdly or long. I want you to know that he does believe in what the brethren have given us.
Well, I'm going to have to answer Paul's comment because he's forcing me to. The church, we call it a canonized text. I don't know whether the church has, maybe they have. They call it the authorized text. It was the 2004 edition, which made 5 changes in substantives, we call them. The new edition makes 1 change. I think Grant Hart put it as a lost opportunity to make important changes. I myself read the Yale edition, and people can read whatever edition. It is true, you can get a testimony of the Book of Mormon, even reading an inadequate text. I got my testimony of the Book of Mormon reading a passage which had a textual error in it, and yet the Spirit witnessed this really happened. But it wasn't witnessing that the error was correct. So the book witnesses of itself, and as far as the testimony goes, you can read the 1830, you can read the printer's manuscript transcript, you can read the 2013 edition, you can read the Yale edition. If you want to do scholarly study of the text, I don't think you have any choice. You have to read a text which is accurate and which puts in many of these things. You may want to read the 6 books that go with it. You may really want to, instead of just reading through the text, that you actually study it. So I myself, do what I want to do on reading the text, and I recommend that people, the real thing is to understand this text, that it came from God, and what it really means. And so that's why I take the position I do, that it is good that this text is available, that it is not hidden away, it is not something done in secret, it is something that's public and people participate, and you can participate, sending me various things. The text itself is something that is fluid, and it isn't ever set in concrete. And I think that's, unless we get a revelation. And where I believe the brethren have the right is to receive a revealed text. They are prophets, seers, and revelators. And where there are still errors, they could get, if the Lord chose and they asked, could get a revealed text. You wouldn't need my recovery work at all, except for the interesting aspects of it. But they haven't done this. I think it's, to be honest, they have always stated they've done recovery work based on the manuscripts and early editions. Joseph Smith said this. The 1981 committee said this. So there is no, I don't know of any claim that the canonized text, the authorized text, is in some way have a kind of imprimatur from the Lord saying it is the correct text. So it's something else. That's my opinion. Okay.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the lectures, Professor Skousen. Thank you. I just had a question, and I hope it doesn't sound too speculative in nature, at least speculating on purpose of why things are being done. But I have to ask because you have so much familiarity with the text. You've mentioned, you've said several times in the series of the lectures that the language of the Book of Mormon suggests, at least from the original text, that it predates the language in the King James Version. And I was just curious then, with your perspective, having done all of this, why you think that might be.
Well, there's two issues here. Some people are saying predate. It overlaps. We have 1500, 1600. The OED says some of them die out, or last citation before the King James. So you have that issue. It goes across too long of a period to be one person's language, I'd say that much. Why it's in this, I used to speculate, so I don't.
Right.
And I don't like, there are theories, various theories of why it might be this way and so forth. And I don't know. But my feeling now is we ought to study this text very seriously, look at all these issues, see what we find, and not worry about, I've had people worried about a committee and who might be on the committee and all this kind of stuff. That's shocking maybe to some of you. But so I disavow any statement I might have made in a first enthusiasm about that, and I don't know. The Lord says, which I shall give unto thee. So I will take that, but it's still what I want, to study. I don't say it predates King James, because some of it overlaps. The word plan is in there, and the third OED online gives, I believe, a 1670 citation is the earliest one for that in English from French. So it isn't just going to be pre-King James.
Thank you.
Okay.
I had the same question.
Okay. Well, that's the end of the line.
That was good. Brother Skousen,
Yeah, he will. Okay, speak up. Thank you.
Brother Skousen, in the examination of the sequence, chronological sequence of the translation of the Book of Mormon, would you actually say that the Book of Lehi, chapter X, verse Y, would precede Alma 36, 22, and then...
It only precedes it in our current text. It, of course, came after.
Yeah.
It was translated last. The small plates are translated last. It's pretty clear now, especially since the two, what were unknown scribes for First Nephi are pretty well, one of them is probably John Whitmer, and the other is, some people saying possibly Christian Whitmer. So if it's Whitmer's, it's at the end. So when the 116 were lost, Joseph Smith went on with where he was. And so he's in Mosiah. They lost chapter 1 of Mosiah, and they lost part of chapter 2. It was in the 116. They went on, they went all the way to the end of Moroni, and then when they were up at the Whitmers, they do the small plates. And so we do have to be, I guess I should be careful and say that the Lehi statement is really post-written from the Alma one, the words that are precisely the same. Now, we don't know what was in the book of Lehi and whether it repeated those or not, but we just don't know. It is worth noting, though, that name Zenock and Coriantumr are first correctly spelled out letter by letter in the large plates, even though they both appear in the small plates, and are written without, correction. So it further supports the notion the small plates are coming second.
Well, that was the point of the question.
Yeah, so I should have been more careful in the way I said that.
Well, the sequence in your slides was the other way, so...
Oh, yeah, that's the way we have it in the text.
Yeah.
And he is quoting Lehi, and he had a source for Lehi's statement. That part's right.
Then in the case of the conclusion of the Book of Mormon, so-called conclusion of the Book of Mormon, after Moroni 1034, the phrase "the end" appears in all editions.
Not mine. It's out.
You always interrupt, except yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm known for doing this. My wife chastises me.
No, I absolutely love that it's not there. But I don't know that you've commented on that omission or...
Yeah, I talked about it. It's at the end. At the very end, I explain why the end is probably extra canonical,
Okay.
added by Oliver Cowdery.
Oh, not Gilbert.
No, it's in the manuscript.
Well-
It's in Oliver's hand, in the printer's manuscript.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, lastly, I'd like to mention when Joseph Smith spoke to the Quorum of the 12 in 1835 in their first meetings, he mentioned how important it was for them to take a record of what they had. And then he lamented the fact that he had not recorded all the revelations and other impressions and minutes of meetings in which the Lord's Word had been revealed. And had they had those things, there would probably be nothing that they would have to inquire of the Lord about. And in fact, it was a great deal of concern to him that he would go and inquire again of something. I'd like to compliment you about the fact that you've spent 25 years of your life in trying to restore that's the Savior's word in Matthew, every word of God, of the Book of Mormon. And so on the basis of my own reading of Joseph, I want to thank you from the depth of my heart for what you've said and done. And you have no need to make any comment to what I've just tried to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Does the Doctrine and Covenants have the same kind of archaic language, archaic already in Joseph's time, that we see in the Book of Mormon? Have you looked at that?
Well, I haven't found it. There is an anti-Mormon that tried to find one if and he gave it, and it wasn't right. Just wasn't. They haven't got any yet. And I know that there's an attempt to get it in the Joseph Smith translation in one place, and it's a little dubious. I mean, it isn't clear. So the only place where I've really seen it very clearly is in the Book of Mormon. So there isn't one in the Doctrine and Covenants that I think is valid.
Thank you.
I've very much enjoyed your lectures, thank you. But I was curious about a theory I'd heard about the ending portion of the Words of Mormon being sort of like a little transition.
Yeah.
And like maybe a summation of the first two chapters of Mosiah. I was wondering if you had any opinion about that.
Well, there's a recent article in BYU Studies, the December issue, which deals with this transition, and I think you should, maybe you have looked at it, but it basically is talking about the possibility that in the Words of Mormon from verse 12 on, that was actually part of the Book of Mosiah, this ending portion of the chapter 2 that was remaining. And so I myself had thought it might come from verse 13 if this is the case, but ultimately we don't know. We do know that Oliver inserted the words, the Book of Mosiah, before the third chapter, the original third chapter, when he did the copy work. And whether they had really figured it out and whether Oliver assigned those last portion to the Words of Mormon or not, it's sort of an unanswered question. We don't have the original here. We almost got it with the Wilford Wood fragments. We got up to Enos, and then no more. Wish we had it. But I recommend that you go look at Lyons and Minson. Their article is very, I think, thought-provoking.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Skousen, for this amazing work. And I have two questions. You mentioned 1 Nephi 7:1, in addition of the word they.
Yeah.
There's another thing in that verse that's always struck me as strange, where it says, his sons should take daughters to wife, but daughters of whom? In fact, in the Spanish translation, the Book of Mormon, it says mujeres, or just women, not daughters.
Yeah.
So that's one question. Do you have any feeling of why it's
No, I've never even thought about it.
Okay.
You know, I'm maybe 2 a.m. I'll wake up and.
Just let
But
me know.
yeah, it's yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
My second question is, as you've been describing what you think is the process of Joseph Smith's translation or transmission, that implies that he wasn't even really looking at the plates, he wasn't seeing the characters, he wasn't learning to know the characters.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And if that's true, like later on when he translated the Book of Abraham, was he doing it by the same sort of process, or was there some way in which he actually learned what some of these characters were?
Well, I don't think he ever learned the characters. I don't think he actually did this that with the Book of Abraham. We do know from his own statements that in the beginning, when he was he did work with the plates, and he had them open, and he said he would copy the characters onto a sheet, and then he says he would use, and when he recorded this account, he called them the Urim and Thummim, but they were originally the Nephite interpreters. He said he would use the Urim and Thummim to get a translation, and he would write it on the sheet of paper. Now, he didn't say whether he worked off, how he worked the actual instrument with respect to those and how he did it. He just doesn't say. But since no one was permitted to see the plates, he had a curtain. So this is where the curtain comes from. It's from the very beginning. Martin Harris said that he handed one of these sheets with the characters and the translation around the curtain to him to take to New York. And we don't have this. So I pointed out the Anton transcript, so-called, is not that thing. But in any event, so he must have figured out that somehow the instrument was giving him the translation in a direct fashion rather than him having to go through the characters, copying, using them. And so when he got a scribe, he never uses the plates. They're not in the plates. Emma said were wrapped up on the table. So there are these two stages, a very early one where he did it himself, and I don't know, it would have been probably part of the 116 pages if, be the very beginning.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Skousen, I'd like to thank you for your great dedication and this tremendous sacrifice of your life and for the love of the Book of Mormon. You didn't discuss the addition of 3 words, the son of, in 1 Nephi chapter 11 and 13.
Yeah,
Right.
I did discuss that in the first lecture.
Okay.
And I attribute those as his attempt to deal with the Catholic sounding the Mother of God, which was criticized. So he makes the first one, and he makes in the next 2 chapters 3 more. I view them as stylistic changes rather than changes of his Trinitarian thinking. And later on, he just leaves the text with some, very strong statements that Christ is God and the Father and so forth throughout the rest of the book. So I think it's a mistake to interpret those as being theological revisions. I think they're basically stylistic, that he was trying to make them easier and that they wouldn't sound Catholic, you know. That's, but I did discuss that, I believe, in the first
I unfortunately
first lecture.
wasn't able to be there.
And it's also thoroughly discussed, you know. I think everyone should buy all 6 books. Well, if you are serious about the text, you do need them, either in the library or your own. Okay.
I have a very good friend, Steve Davis, who in 1960 had a near-death experience and spent 3 days face-to-face with Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
And he says that those are inaccurate changes of doctrine, that it actually changes the identity of God, that the original was correct, that the 1830 version, that Jesus Christ is the eternal Father, the Father of our spirits, actually.
Well, I am not really going to get into that because I don't think it's what was in his editing process. That's my view, and it, you know, other kinds of experiences don't really, for me, count as evidence. So I'm gonna.
Sure.
I think we'll have the next person ask a question.
Dr.
Oh, come on, Ken.
I'm not referring to you, Royal. I'm referring to Dr. Patterson.
Oh, thank you.
Peterson.
Here I do. I did it
See.
again, didn't I? Okay, Dr. Daniel Peterson, yes.
Referred to my question as he introduced you. I'd be very interested in your comments and your thoughts on to what extent does your public works diffuse the arguments of anti-Mormon writers who have condemned the Book of Mormon because of its many changes. It seems like that your work will diffuse many of those arguments. Could you comment on that?
I don't think it diffuses them. They just ignore them. They just keep repeating the same ones.
They can't ignore it.
Well, they do. They just ignore them. They don't engage with me on them. And I won't go online, you know, these people that write these things, I don't know anything about this, but, and then comes this drivel, you know, I mean, yeah, you don't know anything about it, you haven't read anything, you're not really willing to engage in the issues. Yeah, I think you're right if people were really serious. But their purpose is not to really engage in the text, their purpose is to just tear it down. They don't want. The only thing I've ever heard of, somebody said I proved that Solomon Spaulding was one of the scribes on the original manuscript. You know, and somebody else said that I, with my analogical modeling, was using that to hide the defects of the Book of Mormon. I mean, you just finally, these, you know, I wish it were true that the critics of the Book of Mormon were really interested in engaging, but they're not. They're not interested. I have yet to have any of them email me, you know, to talk about it. They'll do it anonymously out there in cyberspace. So, I mean, I wish it were the case, but it isn't.
If they were interested, I'm sure they no longer have any argument because of your work.
Well, yeah, you can't ever underestimate them. Okay.
So you present this idea that Joseph Smith is perhaps reading this translation. You've talked about him spelling. What about the case where Oliver Cowdery wanted to translate and was given the plates and was confused? How does that?
Well, we don't know. I don't think he ever actually translated. I think what he was undertaking was to get permission, a spiritual confirmation that he should do it, and he couldn't get anything. He just got confusion. I don't think D&C 9 should be taken as how we translate. that you think it out in your mind until you get it right. Do you know how long that would take? When I was a kid, I watched What's My Line? And they could guess somebody's profession by using a binary system of keep breaking the world down into binary questions. You don't start out, are you a teacher? You know, but you try and break it into the world in half and half and half. So is that how you're supposed to translate the Book of Mormon each way along? Oh, I got a burning this one, so I'm in that area. I mean, it just will not work. Joseph Smith read the text off, and he was given it. It's a miracle. And I think what Oliver was trying to get was a spiritual confirmation that he should do this. I don't think he ever did it. And I think, Oliver's sitting there watching the farm boy do this, and he thinks God, this is easy. You just look. But if he did look, he didn't get anything,
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Since your earliest text, Book of Mormon, has been published, have you thought of any or discovered any changes that you wish would be in there if you were to publish it again today?
Oh, it's always in flux. There's a few punctuation marks. Well, that's true. I mean, it's sort of stabilized in my mind, but, wait a while. Maybe someone else will come along and have some other thoughts.
I just wanted to thank you for your work in a different way. The earliest text is absolutely a delight to read. It is beautiful. And if you haven't seen it and read it, it's just fantastic. Talking about reading the words reminded me of a passage nearly uniformly overlooked in the early part of the book of Moses, as there's the transition between the vision in the first chapter and then the relation of the creation.
Right.
And the Lord says, write the words which I shall tell thee.
Mm-hmm.
And the symmetry between reading the words which I shall give thee and writing the words which I shall tell thee struck me forcefully. And the other thing that I think is fantastic about this work that you have done is that, in the LDS tradition, we don't think of Scripture as being infallible or perfect. My sister and I were talking the other night. The Book of Mormon is really a hard book. It's really complex. But
Yeah.
it still converts people. And it converts people even when it's been translated badly into other languages. So I
Yeah.
think that's a wonderful thing that is evident from this work, is that, the Lord is able to work with imperfect tools. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
So the church is publishing a new edition of the Scriptures.
Yeah.
Please tell me that some of your findings will be incorporated into that edition.
No, this project never existed. That's right.
I'm really sorry.
No, but they have decided to go into a waiting mode, I suppose, so that's fine. But we do not have, the book is there, and you can read both of them. I think if you're going to do scholarly work, you're pretty much going to have to look at what's been done. The day when you can just take the standard text and assume that it's correct is a mistake. That's my opinion. Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm asking for pure speculation, and you may not want to go there.
But
what do you think is going on when you have the words of Paul, when you have Pauline language in Moroni?
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's interesting. But when is the translation being made? It is being influenced by a later period. There are, the Bible is a source for this translation. The King James Bible is a source for this translation. And there are other things too. Take even that bar of God. The bar of God is a medieval term, or the bar, the idea of judgment where there's a bar. It's a judgment seat in the Bible, but not a bar. So you have translators that are bringing in anachronistic kinds of things. They're in the text, you know, and they will, I think, to get the idea that was on the plates, they will use biblical King James language right out of the blue. I mean, I'm using they. Who knows? I withdraw that pronoun. He. Okay. But yet, you know, I say we study the text. You know, you have experiences with the book and witnesses of the Spirit that it is the Lord's book, and so I go with those too.
So biblical Hebrew really is kind of an insular body of language. There's not a lot there, just the Bible to look at to see what Hebrew is. So we don't have a huge body of language to compare to the Hebraisms or the Hebrew-like passages that you've used here. So have there been efforts to make comparisons to languages like Syriac or other Semitic languages to see if there are linguistic similarities with those that we couldn't find from?
Yeah, well,
from
I know John Gee looked at some of these things I was finding that I was calling Hebrew-like, and could find, if I recall, some of them in Egyptian, but some of them not. So, again, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that this extra and, I call it now Hebrew-like, but I could be wrong. Its source may be something else, because it's not used in the Book of Mormon for short if and clause. I mean, if clauses. It just isn't there. So ultimately, you know, there are expressions, things that, you know, they always refer to the plates of brass, and, you know, things that they use the of construction rather than our compounding of English. There are things which you can find in other languages, so you're right. We mustn't automatically assume that it's going to be, say, Hebrew or what.
What about the frequency of the word and? You know, this superabundance of the word and then... narrative-based texts have lots of ands because we use them as connectors. And little children, when they're writing or telling stories, will have lots of extra ands. It's a sign of a narrative-based. And if you get into more of the Latin syntax, which was taught in the Renaissance period, then there's a basic attempt to try and reduce these kinds of and connectors. So part of it is dealing with that aspect, I would think, but you know, it's something that I haven't really delved into. I'm taking ands where they are. This part's probably outside the scope of maybe what you've done, but maybe, I mean, you associate with a lot of people. So last question is, phrases like, and it came to pass.
Yeah.
I haven't found other passages in other texts in other Semitic languages that have the frequency of that phrase. So
yeah, the frequency is high. It basically means and then. It is a narrative connector. In the Hebrew, it means and it happened, basically, literally translated. And the Tyndall used all different kinds of expressions for that, but the King James translators settled in on it and it came to pass and used it, increased it for their text quite a bit. But the Book of Mormon is considerably more.
You would reduce the text by a fairly good number of pages by removing it, but it will not become a small pamphlet. So, well, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.